Okay, this is chapter 7, middle childhood, talking about the body and mind. So, middle childhood, we're talking about the period between early childhood and early adolescence. So, early childhood, remember, was from 2 to 6, and early adolescence starts about 12. So now we're talking about the ages of 6 to 11. We have a lot of genetic and environmental factors that are going to be interacting throughout this chapter that we're going to talk about, and even the next chapter. And those are kind of to protect middle childhood and children going through this. The evolutionary perspective says that we have genes that protect children who have kind of survived to this point, because if you think about it, back in the day, children often died during childbirth, and women often died during childbirth. But children, we didn't have the medical interventions that we have now. So genes were there to protect children who survive these kind of hazards of childbirth and surviving early childhood. So making it to age 6 was kind of an accomplishment back evolutionarily speaking. So from their perspective, from their viewpoint, we actually have genes that protect children who make it this far. We have lower death rates. Of course, a lot of this is because of immunizations. We also have less lethal accidents from fatal illnesses. We have all of the vaccinations that we have now to protect us from certain diseases that used to kill us. Polio, for example, smallpox, those have basically been eradicated because of vaccinations. But we also have things like seatbelts in cars and airbags and those kind of things. So we do not have a lot of lethal accidents as we used to have. We also have better diagnostic measures so that we can identify illnesses and conditions and treat them appropriately. We have well baby checks, all that kind of stuff. So preventative medical care to make sure that our children are healthy and stay healthy. Smoking has been made illegal in most states unless you're in designated areas, so that has cut down on secondhand smoke. We have better health habits. We know more about nutrition these days, and we actually have specialized programs geared towards healthy eating and better habits for children especially. They have programs at schools for dental checkups, eye checkups, even checking your spine kind of thing. We also have improved oral health because now we are more aware of the fact that bad oral health, even when you have baby teeth, can harm your permanent teeth. So the average child gains about 2 inches and 5 pounds per year. Good health, of course, is going to be related to regular medical care and adult instruction. Now again, it's related to, so it's a correlation. That's not saying that without adults' instruction and regular medical care, a child can't grow up to be healthy, but it's just a lot easier for the child to grow up to be healthy because they have that guidance and they have that care. There are camps for children with special needs that often help them improve their skills, not only becoming healthier in the mind, but healthier in the body as well. Benefits of physical activity, we know they can last a lifetime. We talked about that study in the very first chapter, that obese children who lose the weight as an adult lose the risk factors associated with being obese as well. So physical activity, the benefits are huge, they're tremendous. So they not only help your physical condition, your body, but they also help your emotional and mental health. They help your mind. We've talked about stress and how bad stress is and how bad stress can be for you. So your mental health is crucial, and any kind of physical activity can actually help your mental health because you can be getting rid of that stress, letting your stress out kind of stuff. So it's important to stay physically active. We're talking about, 6 to 11-year-olds, but we're going to talk about how physical activity is important into your adulthood, even past that when you are considered elderly, because even if you're just walking, that's some sort of physical activity, and it's going to help your whole body and your mind. Academic achievement is going to be improved because we have more neurotransmitters now. We have better cerebral blood flow if we are physically active, And you're usually in a better mood and have more energy if you're physically active. And I know it kind of sounds like an oxymoron where you're physically active, you get tired, you get exhausted, but you have more energy. And obviously we're not talking about right after you're done with the physical activity. We're talking about on a regular basis. And your cognition, your thought process is going to be helped as well. And that, again, goes back to the blood flow, the neurotransmitters, and just the better mood in general. There are concerns, though. Sports are not always beneficial, especially to children. They may get hurt, injuries, breaking bones, tendinitis, things like that. That can impact their later adulthood even. If they get concussions, traumatic brain injuries, for example. Concussions can last into a lifetime. They can impair your memory. And they're actually doing studies with football players now, because a lot of football players, unfortunately, are going through like early onset dementia, and they have trouble remembering day-to-day activities. And a lot of athletes who have committed suicide or just died have donated their brains to science to kind of study how concussions and traumatic brain injuries have impacted their lives, and if it may be added to parts of their problems. So children, of course, can benefit from exercise in their neighborhoods, different sports, little leagues, things like that. However, finding places to play these days may be more difficult because we're building everywhere. We don't have a lot of parks anymore. There aren't a lot of open spaces or organized events even to play things. Modern life challenges neighborhood play, of course, too, because, we have jobs, we have lives. Parents are going to school, parents are working, doing other things. So sometimes it's kind of hard to make sure your children are playing safe. But, at some point, children do need the outdoors. They do need a safe place to play. And we as parents need to make sure they get that. Indoor activities often replace outdoor play. We've talked about technology multiple times and how becoming technologically advanced is a good thing, but a bad thing at the same time, because children are playing their PlayStations instead of running outside and playing baseball or something. So this can be a problem. Economic barriers may limit participation in leagues and club activities, because if you're a child in a low SES family, you don't have a lot of extra money, and sometimes these activities and Little League and, playing sports can be very expensive. If you have to buy the equipment or even the shoes, the clothes, those are added expenses that some people can't afford. So that may limit the participation. And time for school physical activities and recess is reduced in many schools. I kind of brought up the fact that we're going to get into, when we get into later adulthood, or not later adulthood, when we get to adolescence, the need for recess and how a lot of schools just don't think it's necessary anymore. But the bottom line is they're trying to kind of get rid of recess as the children get older, but children always need a break. It's very hard to focus if you're in school all the time, just focusing on academics and having to be on kind of thing. So children do need activities. They do need a break. They do need that recess. Many 6 to 11-year-olds eat too much, exercise too little, and can become overweight or obese as a result. So, the combination of PlayStations and reducing the play outside and reducing this exercise, along with what do you do while you're playing your games? Well, you eat. A lot of times, a lot of snack foods that have empty calories. So childhood obesity is increasing worldwide, and it's more than doubled since 1980 in all 3 North American nations. Unfortunately, this excessive weight contributes to future health risks. But like I said, the good news is that we have found that if the children lose weights as adults, it kind of decreases those risks as well. Average achievement has a tendency to decrease. Your self-esteem kind of gets down. You get lonely. But again, just because this happens in childhood doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. If the children start to become more active, watch what they eat a little bit, these problems can go away. The The BMI, the body mass index, I kind of have a problem with this because it is the ratio of your weight to your height, and that is all that is taken into account. It's you divide a person's body weight by how tall they are in inches, and that's your BMI. The problem I have with it is it doesn't take into account muscle or fat. You know, if somebody is really muscular, they can still have a high BMI. So I'm not a big fan of that, but you guys need to know what it is. If a child has a BMI above the 85th percentile, they are considered overweight. If it's above the 95th percentile, they are considered obese. Again, we're going to the CDC's 1980 standards for children of a given age, so kind of going back in time a little bit, but it's still relevant, and you still have to watch what your children eat and how much activity they do. Genetically speaking, there are a lot of influences that affect weight, how active you are, how hungry you get, what kind of foods you like, your body type in general, and if your metabolism's high or not. Infants that aren't breastfed and have solid foods before the age of 4 have a tendency to be on the overweight side. Preschoolers who watch TV in their bedrooms and drink a lot of pop or soda have a tendency to be on the overweight side. And then when you get to school age, sleep actually starts to come into play. If the children do not get enough sleep, if they have excessive screen time, so they're in front of a TV or computer or PlayStation a lot and don't play outside a lot, then they have a tendency to be on the obese side. So yes, genes kind of play an influence, but parenting practices do as well. There's what we call pester power. The children bug the parents enough that the parents just give in and say, do whatever you want kind of thing, because they say it over and over and over again. So the key is not to give in to pester power. Asthma is a big health problem. In some schools, asthma is so common that using an inhaler is a common thing. They actually have inhalers on standby in the nurse's office. So there isn't one single factor that causes asthma. So we do know that there can be some genetics involved. We do know that pollutions, of course, are going to be involved, allergens, if you're not as active. And basically, asthma is a constriction of the bronchioles in our respiratory tract inside of our lungs. So it's an inflammatory disorder of the airways of the respiratory system. And basically what happens is the child will have a harder time breathing, they will experience wheezing, shortness of breath, and it's because the inflammation constricts those bronchioles. The best treatment, of course, is the inhaler there. It dilates and opens up the bronchioles and is pretty fast acting. Childhood rates have tripled in recent years, so this is kind of an issue. Yeah. So cognition, Piaget, again, how children think as opposed to what they think. Concrete operational thought. This is Piaget's term for the ability to reason logically. So before we had pre-operational thought, and now we have concrete operational thought. So before we were talking about children could not think logically, now we are talking about children can think logically. So we are gaining the ability to logically talk about and logically relate our experiences and perceptions. Classification is the principle that things can be organized into groups or categories according to some characteristic that they have in common. So children are able to classify objects now. Children can basically learn almost anything. The key is what they are taught, so what adults decide to teach them. That's where the adult comes in. Some young kids can learn chess without a problem, and they can be great at it, while others can play piano or write poetry, while still others are, really better book-wise, academically speaking. So school-age children are no longer limited by that egocentrism that we talked about before. They can actually use logic. They can become more scientific now. It's no longer viewed as, from my perspective and my perspective alone. Now we can see things from other people's perspectives. Seriation is the principle that things can be arranged in a series, as the name kind of implies. So seriation is crucial for understanding a number sequence. Just learning your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of thing. We understand that the numbers go in a sequence, and we can arrange things in a series. Even something, arranging it from simple to more complex kind of thing. Piaget also recognized that connections allow logical ideas to be applied to many specific things. So we actually have brain scans that demonstrate maturation and classification. We have hubs, especially near the corpus callosum. Now remember, the corpus callosum is the connection between the left and right hemispheres. So we have hubs near there that kind of light up when you're asking somebody to classify things. We also have links between the hypothalamus and the amygdala. So the hypothalamus, remember, releases hormones to help control our body, and the amygdala is our fear and even rage and aggression. There are also neurological pathways from general to particular and back again. So we can actually see the pathways when we're talking about something in general and then going to something more specific and then going back to something more general. So we have all of these connections, and they're really crucial for our complex thinking and complex processes that we have going on. We have neurons making connections, we have new concepts being introduced, and we can take those concepts and apply them to specifics and make those connections, which is really important. So we can know that, food is bacon and bacon is a food kind of thing. You can go from general to specific and back again. Vygotsky, remember, he believed with education and your social context, your culture. So he believed that education kind of is everywhere and knowledge is acquired from this social context, but instruction is essential. Remember, he was the guided participation gentleman who believed that we are all on this journey where mentors must guide the children through what we know and through how we survive and how we live. So each child is being guided through their zone of proximal development, and that's really crucial to learning. We have to keep in mind that memorization is not learning. Memorization is just memorizing things. It's very important to learn the material. If you just memorize everything I'm saying right now, you're going to forget it. But if you actually learn and understand and grasp the concept of what I'm saying right now, you're going to remember it. So there's a huge difference between memorization and learning when you're actually able to apply what you know and what you remember. And I've told you guys, repetition and rehearsal is the easiest way to remember things. You just keep going over it and over it again, say it out loud, read to yourself, whatever, but that's the easiest way to learn. From the information processing perspective, the maturation of the cortex is crucial. So information processing compares it to a computer. So we look at the analysis of data. So we look at what comes in, the connections that we have, what we have stored, and what goes out. So we select relevant units of information, and then we kind of analyze and connect them, and then we express what we think. We express our conclusions. So we can, we're able to think like information comes into us, we can kind of analyze it, see if we have any memory or recollection of it, and then come out with a result, basically. Children do not suddenly grasp the logic of the number system, according to Piaget. So children do not automatically know numbers. So basically kind of what we do is we know we can access a large amount of information. We have a large amount of information available to us. But we actually, like I said, have to learn that material. We can't just try to do rote memorization. We have to learn it. So Siegler said that the knowledge of math kind of gradually appears. So they're kind of in agreement here. Siegler said that it was kind of like waves on a beach. It ebbed and flowed. So some things they kind of picked up quickly, other things they had more trouble with, but the end result was that it leveled out over time. Some of the early math achievements do not correlate with later math achievements, so you can be a really good counter, but that doesn't mean you're going to be awesome in math. But others do correlate. So like when you can estimate where a number is on a line, you usually can grasp fractions pretty well. So some things do correlate, some things just do not correlate. But everybody's in agreement for the most part that children don't just automatically understand math. They have to take the time and learn it and study it, practice it. As far as our memory goes, we have sensory memory, which is very short term. It is what comes in. It's a split second. You can process it. It registers. So it's the stimulus that's coming in. So a sound or something you see, that kind of thing. Working memory is what we refer to as short-term memory. It is current conscious mental activity that occurs. It's still not super long, and you can actually only hold a certain amount of things in your short-term memory before they either get kicked out or sent to long-term memory. But our goal is we want things to be in long-term memory. This is where information is stored indefinitely. You can have information here organized, you can retrieve it when you need it, but it's stored indefinitely. And this is what we really want to work on, because if something is in your short-term memory and you don't use it, it has a tendency to go away. If you keep using it and it's a repetitive kind of thing, then it transfers to your long-term memory, and then you kind of have it. So it goes back to the kind of if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. So we want to make sure that we use it. Your brain basically selects what goes from working memory to long-term memory. And part of how it selects that is based on what's meaningful to you. And part of what's meaningful to you are things that you practice over and over again. So working memory involves gradually through processing. Culture differences are evident simply because certain things are more important in some cultures than others. Information from working memory is either transferred to long-term memory or knocked out. And your memory storage actually expands over childhood, but retrieval is really the important part. So it really doesn't matter how much you can store. If you can't retrieve it, kind of doesn't matter. Extensive knowledge base makes it easier to master new related information. So the more you know, the kind of easier it is to obtain new information and incorporate it into what you know. And again, experience is going to have a huge factor on this. Current opportunity is going to have a factor in this. And personal motivation has a factor in this. So what you have learned in the past, what you have a chance to learn now, and what you want to learn are really important in figuring out how much you're going to know. And it's like I told you guys, everybody knows the words to a song, and everybody can sing a song. Even if you hate the song, you still know the words. Well, that's because it's played over and over again on the radio. So if you go through the information you need to learn over and over again, you're going to learn it. It's easier to learn. Emotional regulation, again, remember, is controlling our emotions, expressing our emotions appropriately. That gets better as you get older. And selective attention also gets better. You have the ability to pay attention to what's important. You have the ability to pay attention to things that you want to pay attention to. And you can kind of weed out unimportant things. So selective attention would have to do with, like, if I'm lecturing and two people are talking behind you. Yes, it's annoying, but you still have the ability to listen to me. You can still pay attention to me. Yeah. Metacognition is understanding your own learning. It's the ultimate control process, and this gets better every year of middle childhood. And it's like, if you think about the universe and, it's understanding yourself. It's understanding how you learn. It's understanding what works best for you. So some people are visual learners, and they realize that. Some people are audio learners. Some people are hands-on learners. And metacognition involves finding how you learn the best and then doing that, making sure that you learn to your best ability. The maturing corpus callosum, of course, is going to enable our balance and improve our handedness. Myelination, remember the myelin sheath speeds up transmissions, so it's going to speed up our thoughts and behavior. And we also have our prefrontal cortex up here developing, and that's going to allow better control processes. So we're going to be able to plan better. Our executive functions are going to be better. We're going to be able to organize things and prioritize. Reaction time is the time it takes to respond to a stimulus, either physically or cognitively. So physically, blinking your eyes, cognitively by thinking. And this gets better as you get to a certain age and then starts to go down as you get older. And we'll talk more about that later on. As I've already said, selective attention is your ability to concentrate on some stimuli while ignoring others. So if those people are talking behind you, ignore them. And automation is the process which makes repetition of a sequence of thoughts and actions. It makes it routine, so you don't have to think about it anymore. This is required in academic skill development. So it's basically reading, writing, repeating certain sequences of actions, and then you don't have to think about it. When you're writing on a piece of paper, taking notes, you don't have to think about what you're writing, you just write it. While you're reading a book, you don't have to think about what you're reading, you're just reading it. While you're reading or listening to what I'm saying or reading the screen right now, you don't have to think about what you're doing, it's automatic. And without that, you're not going to be able to develop your skills and learn academically speaking. Because if you're thinking about what you're writing or trying to think about what you're reading, you're going to be spending all your time thinking about that, and you're not going to actually be paying attention to what you're supposed to be learning. By the age of 6, some can speak a second language, but most know the basic vocabulary and grammar of their first language. In middle childhood, you learn thousands of new words, how to use complex grammar. We're learning complex thoughts now, so we become more flexible, we become more logical. You can start to understand compound words, metaphors, figures of speech, things like that, that little children don't understand. Pragmatics is the ability to use words and devices to communicate in different contexts. So children can change from the formal to the informal to fit the audience. And I've talked about this before. It's like I would hope you would speak to your professors differently than you would speak to your friends versus how you speak to your parents, kind of thing. You can kind of adjust how you talk to people. Young children don't have the ability to do this. They may blurt out, why is she fat, or why is this house a mess, kind of thing. They don't think about where they're at and what they're doing. Older children, middle childhood now, we have the ability to adjust to our situation, so we can change how we speak depending on who we're speaking to. International schooling has a lot of differences. Culture's different in what they value, as I've said multiple times, so schooling is going to differ in what they're stressing. Educational practices differ across cultures, and variation is often greater if they have a hidden curriculum. Now, a hidden curriculum is like an underlying role or rule or practice that kind of influences the curricula. So 4 general principles with the development of psychopathology. So now we're talking about abnormal behavior, kind of thing. We have 4 general principles here. We have abnormality is normal. Now, what that means is that most children do act oddly at times. So something can be considered abnormal, but it's actually perfectly normal because it's common for children to act different sometimes. Disability changes year by year. This basically means that one problem can happen with another problem. So this comorbidity can happen. So when they have one problem one year, it may turn into a different problem another year, or it can be more than one problem all the time, and just sometimes one problem sticks out more than the other. Life may get better or worse. We can't predict it. Sometimes life gets better, sometimes it gets worse, and there's no way to predict this. And then diagnosis and treatment reflect the social context. Again, the surroundings, the community, the church, the family itself. What kind of diagnosis they're going to get, what kind of treatment they're going to get is going to be directed by their caregivers. So that can lead to a good thing or a bad situation. Bad situations if they don't get proper treatment and diagnosis. Good situations, of course, if they do. So how do we measure the mind? Aptitude is one, and aptitude is basically your potential to learn knowledge and specific skills. Achievement tests, so the ACT, we have a lot of standardized achievement tests, mastering the subject. Multiple intelligences, we have varied sets of abilities that are measured with those. And then we do have standard IQ tests, the Stanford-Binet, the Wechsler, or the Flynn. The Stanford-Binet and the Wechsler are standard IQ tests that are given often. The Flynn effect basically refers to the fact that IQ can change. So what was once a high IQ may not be a high IQ anymore. Low IQ students can become gifted students. It can change. It's not a set in stone thing. Gardner said that there were 7 intelligences: linguistic, which is your speaking, your language; logical, mathematical; musical, spatial, so 3D dimensions; bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, so between individuals, intrapersonal, within yourself, naturalistic, and existential. Each of these is associated with a region of the brain, and each is associated with education. Like, for example, if you have a high intrapersonal score, you have a really deep self-understanding. If you prefer to draw as opposed to writing, that can kind of be used in education. Two basic principles that go back to developmental psychopathology and kind of complicate our diagnosis and treatment are multifinality and equifinality. Multifinality means that one cause can have a lot of different manifestations. So there can be one diagnosis happening, one disorder happening, but it can manifest itself in multiple ways. So it's kind of hard to make a diagnosis because you have all of these things going on, but it's really being caused by this. Equifinality is kind of the opposite, with one symptom can have multiple causes. So you can have one symptom happening, but a bunch of things underlying it and a bunch of things causing it. So both of these issues can really complicate the diagnosis and treatment. Some even suggest that childhood psychopathology was underdiagnosed in the early DSM editions and overdiagnosed in the DSM-5. So the diagnostic manual that psychiatrists use, they say that as they tried to improve it, as every edition came out, they improved it so much that now everybody kind of fits into the psychopathology, which we know, not everybody fits into psychopathology, but the problem is children are changing all the time. So when you try to diagnose a child too young, we have to go back to remember abnormality is normal sometimes. So some children just do things. So that can become a problem. ADHD, we've talked about a couple times. Person is inattentive, impulsive, overactive, can't concentrate. Some suggest the relationship with the brain regulation. We talked about the corpus callosum and prefrontal cortex deformities. There isn't really a biological marker for this, and it's often comorbid, which means that it's often in addition to other things. The thing is, it has to start before the age of 12, and it must impact their daily life. So their daily life has to be impacted some way, and they have to have evidence that this was present before they were age 12. Increasing incidence concerns are, of course, misdiagnosis. The treatment might actually make it worse if you're misdiagnosed. Drug abuse. Oftentimes they fake it to get prescribed the drugs because, as we talked about, they often prescribe stimulants. And then again, normal behavior can be considered pathological. Just because children are curious, really impulsive, and have a lot of energy doesn't mean that they're ADHD. A lot of children are like that. Specific learning disorders, according to the DSM-5, are you have a marked deficit in a particular area of learning that's not caused by an apparent physical disability or by a stressful home environment. Basically, you have difficulty learning skills that most children easily learn. Dyslexia, you have an unusual difficulty reading. It's thought to be neurologically underdeveloped. Usually you flip words or letters around. A lot of different causes for this, so it's really hard to treat. And then dyscalculia is unusual difficulty with math. We think it originates from an area of the brain, but again, kind of difficult to treat. autism spectrum disorder, they have poor social understanding, impaired language, strange patterns of play. The cause and the treatment are still disputed. Equifinality applies again, so you have a lot of causes underlying what's happening. Most are diagnosed at age 4 or later. 46% are in the normal or above range in IQ tests. So just because they are autistic does not mean that they are not smart. It is 5 times higher for boys than girls, and 1/3 higher for European Americans. So there are differences there. We do have 3 categories: mild, moderate, and severe. Of course, severe being the worst.